Director Wes Craven knows horror. He has created some of the best horror movies in the past 50 years, and he has at times elevated the horror genre to all new levels. Released in 1989, the movie Shocker proved to be one of the few misfires in his legacy. It features a TV repairman named Horace Pinker who goes on a killing spree in the city of Los Angeles. And when Detective Don Parker gets too close to catching him, Pinker makes it personal by murdering his wife and foster son and daughter. We'll take a look back at this bonkers horror film on the next Back to the Feature.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
The opening credits scene is very reminiscent of the original Nightmare on Elm Street movie, where we see Pinker toiling away in his workshop working on various TVs and electronics. We meet a college football star named Jonathan, played by a young Peter Berg, who happens to be the other foster son of Detective Parker. He's been having intense dreams, including one about Pinker murdering his family. He wakes up screaming from his nightmare only for his dad to call and tell him that his mom and siblings have been killed. After the funeral, Jonathan tells his dad how he dreamed about the murders exactly as they happened. He knows details of the murders despite not going inside the crime scene, and he tells him that he saw the killer's face and his name on the side of his van. He even convinces his dad to let him tag along to catch the guy. That night, Detective Parker, along with Jonathan and some fellow police officers, break into Pinker's place of business. Pinker is there but hidden away behind a secret bookshelf. He kills one of the officers and steals his uniform, and then kills two more as he makes his escape out the back. Detective Parker is pissed that he's just lost 4 of his men, but at least now he has identified the killer. Unfortunately, the part about Jonathan dreaming of the murders and helping locate Pinker is all over the news, and now Pinker knows about Jonathan too. The next morning, Jonathan gives his girlfriend Alison a necklace as a birthday present before he heads off to football practice. Once he's gone, Pinker slips in and kills Alison, and then later at practice, the coach tells Jonathan he needs to get home. When he arrives, police are everywhere and they warn him not to go inside. Of course he doesn't listen, and he looks in the bathroom where Pinker has splattered blood all over the place and wrote "Happy Birthday" in Alison's blood. In a scene right out of Elm Street, Jonathan teams up with Rhino, his friend and teammate, to watch him sleep so he can track down Pinker in his dream. In his dream, he finds Horace just as he's in the middle of murdering another family. But Jonathan interrupts him and Rhino wakes him up just before Pinker can try to kill him. The two then drive off to where Jonathan saw Horace in his dream. They're followed by the cops to the location when suddenly a scream is heard from an upstairs window. Detective Parker, all the cops, and Jonathan run inside and confront Horace on the very same stairwell we saw in the dream. Pinker almost gets away, running across the rooftops, but Jonathan catches up to him and slows him down just long enough for the police to show up and arrest him. Detective Parker and Jonathan agree that they should have front row seats to Pinker's execution for what he did to their family. Tried, convicted, and sentenced to the electric chair, we see a room full of witnesses gathered to see Pinker fry. As requested, Jonathan and his dad have front row seats. Guards bring a preacher to Pinker's cell for last rites when they find him on his knees hooked by jumper cables to the TV set he got as his last wish. Electricity is flying all over the place, and on the floor are a bunch of lit candles and a couple of large books. It looks like he's making a deal with the devil as a pair of lips forms in the air out of the electricity and says to him, "You got it, baby." The room then explodes with light as he's hit with more electricity from the TV. The guards quickly get into the cell and shut everything down. They saw the lips too and have no idea what was happening. They drag him from the cell where one of the guards starts to do CPR on him, which ends up being a bad idea because Pinker just bites his bottom lip clean off. Pinker is finally brought to the death chamber, and he seems pretty happy to be there. But once he spots his two main guests, it's time for a big plot twist. Turns out Pinker is Jonathan's real dad, who beat him as a young boy when his mom tried to stop him with a gun. Jonathan looks at Detective Parker as he doesn't remember any of this. Pinker tells him how Jonathan watched as he killed his mom, and it turns out he has Jonathan to thank for that limp, because Jonathan picked up her gun and shot him right in the knee. He tells Jonathan they're the same. They both have a killer instinct, like father, like son. The warden orders the execution to proceed. The lever is pulled and Pinker is hit with a giant dose of electricity. The lights go out briefly, and when they come back on, Pinker is slumped over with his bald head showing severe burns. But somehow he's still alive though. The doctor goes in to check on him, but she's electrocuted by touching him, and then all hell breaks loose. Bolts of electricity fly all over the place as Pinker is electrocuted again until the lights go back out. And when they come back on, the chair in the chamber is empty. The police run out the back hallway thinking he escaped that way. But Jonathan and his dad look around the chamber and discover that Pinker didn't escape after all. His body was behind a door and falls to the ground before catching fire, and then the flames flare up and his body just disappears. The prison doctor survived the zap she took, but the warden insists that his officers take her to the hospital anyways. Once they get her outside, she's perfectly fine. They put her in the back of the squad car and race off to the hospital. But just down the road, she jumps up and kills one of the cops, causing the other one to wreck into a tanker truck. And then at the crash site, they find that the driver is still alive, and Jonathan tries to tell his dad that he thinks Pinker is still alive as well. That night, Jonathan has a dream where he's visited by a bloody Alison, who warns him that Horace Pinker has to be stopped. Well, duh, Alison. He tells her that Pinker is dead and gone, but she insists by giving him back the necklace from her birthday, saying it represents their love and will keep him away. He wakes up screaming and, of course, finds the necklace laying on the bed next to him. Next, we see Jonathan packing up to move. Who wants to keep living where his girlfriend was killed? A cop shows up at his door, and it turns out to be the same one that survived the car accident outside the prison. And when he goes to answer the door, the cop opens fire, sending Jonathan scurrying away. The cop gives chase but suffers from the same limp as Horace Pinker. That could be a clue. The Pinker cop manages to wound Jonathan in the arm and keeps chasing him until his body gives out. An unfortunate jogger comes by and gets shot by Pinker cop, who then crawls over to the jogger where we see a wave of energy move between them. Of course, shooting the jogger first wasn't the smartest idea because that body doesn't last long, and Pinker is forced to jump into a little girl. Pinker girl limps off and commandeers a nearby tractor that conveniently has the keys in it. She drives off looking for Jonathan, who's just now discovering the dead jogger laying next to the little girl's bike. Before he can put two and two together, he's almost ran over by the tractor. Pinker girl jumps down from the tractor and limp runs away as fast as she can, which is pretty comical to watch. Jonathan snatches her up just as her mother sees him and starts screaming. Pinker girl takes off running again with her mom and Jonathan in pursuit. He catches her pretty quickly and pulls out the necklace from Alison to exorcise Pinker from the girl, and as soon as he pulls out the necklace, he gets a swift kick in the nuts. He knocks the girl down as he's tackled by the mom, and the tackle causes him to drop the necklace on the girl, and we see the ghost of Pinker rise up out of her. The mom sees him too and freaks out just before Pinker jumps into her body. But he's not there long though, as a construction worker comes over to see what's going on. Turns out he's a much better host, so Pinker jumps into him, and all Jonathan can do is watch Pinker play musical bodies. Pinker the builder then chucks Jonathan's necklace into the lake, leaving Jonathan with no recourse but to run away. Jonathan is back at the school gym getting patched up by a fellow student coach and explaining the Pinker situation to Rhino and their football coach. He talks his coach into getting his diving mask from his house so he can dive for the necklace since it's the only thing that will work on Pinker. Little do they know, but Pinker the builder was hiding under the bleachers the whole time, listening to their plan. And that night, Jonathan and Rhino are waiting at the lake, but since the coach is a no-show, Jonathan decides that he no longer wants Rhino's help because he's worried it will only get him killed. He leaves Rhino behind and returns to his house to see what happened to the coach. Jonathan finds Coach Pinker hiding behind the shower curtain. He attacks Jonathan and they fight it out until the ghost of Alison shows up and encourages the coach to fight back against Pinker. And he does fight back but ends up stabbing himself in the chest. Pinker's electric ghost rises up out of him and Jonathan leaps at him only to be knocked back by a shock of electricity. Alison shoots a beam of white light at Pinker, pushing him into the other room. And while Pinker is figuring out his next move, Alison proceeds to distract Jonathan by telling him that she has something very important to tell him. But Pinker decides to leave by stretching his fingers and inserting them into the wall socket. He's sucked into the wall socket just before Detective Parker kicks in the front door. His dad sees the bodies in the other room and has Jonathan arrested. Parker instructs the officers to place him in his car and he'll drive him to jail. Parker touches the lamp and gets shocked on his way out, and when we see him walking out of the house, he now has a pronounced limp. Sound familiar? Before Detective Pinker can do anything, Rhino busts Jonathan out of the police car so he can escape. Rhino is arrested and Detective Pinker jumps in the car in hot pursuit. Eventually this turns into a foot chase through an alley where Jonathan pauses to tell his dad to try and fight it. Detective Pinker has the best response here. He tells Jonathan to eat shit and die. Classic 80s comeback. The foot chase continues until Jonathan ends up at a TV station and decides to climb on the roof and up on the transmission tower. Why he thought this was a smart move, I don't know. Because short of jumping off, he's kind of cornered up there. And once at the top, we're back to the pleading for his dad to fight back. Pinker does the old fake out where he briefly acts like the dad is back in charge, only to attack Jonathan. Big shocker. His dad appears to suffer a heart issue and falls onto the satellite dish. He's hanging on, but then Pinker comes out and tells Jonathan he's nationwide now, as he then disappears into the satellite signal. Just like that, he's gone, leaving Detective Parker hanging. Jonathan manages to pull him up, and it turns out Parker didn't have a bad heart after all. Turns out he can play a trick just like Pinker. We see a newscaster talking about Jonathan being arrested, and that while he was in jail, another family was murdered, where the killer left a bloody message behind for Jonathan and signed it Horace Pinker. Based on his dad's testimony and lab results, Jonathan is then released from jail. With his newfound freedom, Jonathan returns to Rhino and his teammates to help him stop Pinker once and for all. The first part of their plan is to break into the power station while Jonathan has a news crew meet him at his dad's house to film a live broadcast at midnight with the promise that he'll deliver the killer right to them. His only instruction is for them to have their camera broadcasting live at 5 till midnight. Jonathan then leaves to go fetch the necklace from the lake. After 3 failed attempts at diving to the bottom to find it, he pleads to the sky for help. And someone was listening because Alison shows up. But it's not very helpful because all he does is freak out and swim away. And then we learn that it was all a dream. He's actually sleeping on his waterbed. Everyone else is doing his dirty work and he's taking a nap. While he sleeps, the TV starts to slide out away from the wall. This being the 1980s, it's a big console TV. The TV comes on and a nature show about birds is on, and as the camera pans up to the bird nest in the tree, we see Pinker climb in the tree looking at the camera. Back at the lake, Jonathan gets out of the water, only to be met by Alison. Next thing we see, he starts making out with her. Back at the power station, Rhino keeps an eye on his watch as Horace is climbing out of the TV in Jonathan's room while he sleeps. Meanwhile, Jonathan gets cock-blocked at the lake when all of Pinker's victims show up, telling him to wake up. Jonathan's dumbass decides he doesn't want to wake up. He'd rather stay there with Ghost Alison instead. It's pretty selfish if you ask me. He knows that not only will he die, but Pinker will go on killing more people. Thankfully, Ghost Alison isn't as selfish and she makes him wake up. Now wide awake, it's all quiet with the exception of the preacher on the TV asking for money. He realizes he's wearing the necklace now. The preacher starts talking straight to the camera as if he's talking to Jonathan. As he sits there staring at the TV, the arms of the recliner wrap around him and start squeezing. Then a pair of eyes look out of the chair and it's laughing at him until the arms touch the necklace, setting off sparks that causes the recliner to partially change into Horace Pinker. At least the upper half of him. Jonathan stands up, but Pinker chair has him in a bear hug. More sparks fly, and this time Jonathan gets away. He runs into the other room, but Pinker comes falling out of the overhead light, blocking his exit. Jonathan manages to crawl back into the bedroom where the TV is now showing a war film. He grabs the necklace around his neck just as Pinker comes out of the wall socket. And it seems like Pinker can make himself solid when he wants to. He proceeds to choke Jonathan, but can't hold his solid form when the necklace is shoved in his face. Pinker escapes by diving into the TV, and holding onto the necklace, Jonathan makes a bold move and dives in after him. Pinker starts chasing Jonathan through various war scenes with bullets and explosions all around them. And the next thing we see is that they've moved on to an episode of Leave It to Beaver. However, the Beav doesn't notice Jonathan running alongside their car. From there, they end up in a rock music video starring Alice Cooper, and then we see them running away as the Hindenburg crashes to the ground behind them. As we see them finding it out in the streets of some news footage from a riot, we hear the newscaster say that there have been numerous reports of people seeing Jonathan and Pinker fighting on their TV screens. As he speaks, the two men are fighting in a boxing ring before ending up right next to the newscaster. Pinker throws Jonathan onto the news desk, knocking the newscaster to the side. The newscaster is left stunned as they run off screen and end up back in the war movie. Pinker grabs a knife from a dead soldier and chases Jonathan into a scene from Frankenstein. They run through Dr. Frankenstein's lab only to show up in front of a nuclear blast where the shockwave sends Jonathan flying. When he finally hits the ground, Pinker is on top of him with a knife, but he manages to get away and they both dive out of a TV into a random family's living room. Not only does Pinker beat up Jonathan, he starts punching the dad too while his wife and kids just watch. Jonathan grabs the TV remote and dives back into the TV, where we see the same preacher from before. Not one to be left out, Pinker dives in after him. They land on the studio floor where the preacher is broadcasting his telethon. He tries to intervene in the name of the Lord, but he's rebuked by Pinker. Jonathan distracts him by using the remote to change the channel, and he keeps changing it until he hits the channel with the newsman broadcasting live from his dad's house. Pinker dives at him and they come flying out of the TV and onto the bed, scaring the crap out of the newsman and his camera guy. Pinker then turns solid and the camera guy points the camera at him, and when Pinker sees himself on TV, he threatens the men, causing them to take off running. It's just the two of them now. Pinker swings the knife down, but Jonathan grabs the remote and hits the freeze frame button, stopping him in his tracks. That's right, kids, it wasn't always called a pause button. Anyways, Pinker is not only frozen, but he's completely under Jonathan's control. Just waving the remote around causes Pinker to fly across the room, and he's pissed. Jonathan explains that his master plan is for the power to be cut, and anyone left in the room will be screwed. He plans to be the only one to exit through the TV. But Pinker points out one little flaw in his plan. Turns out he's off by a few minutes. Rhino cuts the power just as he realizes his mistake. As the power starts to go out across the town, Pinker dives at the TV just as Jonathan unplugs it. With the TV off, all Pinker manages to do is put his head through the screen, causing lots of sparks. Jonathan grabs the necklace and makes a fist with it, which allows him to punch Pinker and knock him on his butt. While Pinker is stunned, Jonathan hangs the necklace on the lens of the camera and takes a chance by diving at the camera lens. He disappears inside and the camera falls over, disconnecting from power. As Jonathan flies through the digital world, Pinker screams as he blows up in a bunch of sparkling lights. We see Jonathan come flying out of the TV back into his own house, and as he lays on the floor, you can hear Pinker screaming in the flames of the broken TV circuits. As the power goes completely out in town, Pinker is trapped, but he's still threatening Jonathan. Jonathan then uses the remote to turn the TV off, which silences Pinker. The end. I saw this movie in the theater because it was directed by Wes Craven. I didn't realize how crazy it was going to be. It really seemed like two different movies. It starts off as a serious slasher movie, and then switches gear to a campy supernatural free-for-all. That last half was all over the place. What do you think about this movie? Good or bad? Let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed this trip down memory lane, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below to help grow this channel. I appreciate you taking time out of your day and hope you will come back for the next Back to the Feature.